Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show, Ancient Secrets Revealed. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Here today with Scott Davalos. And, before we get started with the main body of the podcast, there's so much going on in the world today. And I want to hit a number of these different things just real quick. One of them is BlackRock. This guy named Larry Fink. He's an asset manager. I think I was telling you about him, Scotty, huh?
Yeah.
If I understand it correctly, and I looked at two different sources now. One source said that he manages $16 trillion. Another one said 10. I don't know if that's true or not, but at any rate, he manages a lot of money. Oh, and he's in 100 different countries around the world, highly influential, highly connected with China, and very much promoting the woke agenda. And, it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that, in China, you can't do anything woke, but behind the scenes, woke China in this country, through people like Larry Fink, are really strongly promoting the woke agenda. And their intention, I understand, is to just undermine the nation, come up with all these crazy things and get people thinking crazy, and the whole country just goes downhill. And it's interesting because Larry Fink has so much money that he's managing that he has very strong levers against big, huge companies in this country and around the world. I don't know specifically which. I think probably Coca-Cola, the NBA, and part of his willingness to get involved with them and support them with financing, and that is if they support the woke agenda. I think that's important to know. There's a book, some Indian guy wrote it. I can't think of his name right now. He's, a U.S. citizen, and that seems like a really bright guy, young guy. He wrote a book called Woke Inc. You might want to check that out. And he talks about the whole idea about how the financial Wall Street and people like Larry Fink, how they're making tons of money by dealing with China and being with China. And then China, in turn, gets the whole woke thing going, just what we described. But he goes into detail about how all that is structured. And I find it really interesting, So that's one thing. Another thing is the truckers. What do you think about the truckers, Scotty, in Canada? Now it's going international, France and the U.S. and everything else.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Even here, there was rumor that the truckers were going to block getting into the Super Bowl or all the.
I heard that a little differently. I heard that they're going to start at the Super Bowl with their, what do they call it? I'm going to say caravan. That's not the right word. Convoy to go to drive to Washington, D.C. and do what they did in Canada.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it's depending, I think, on which news agency that you're.
Boy, isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
You hear the same news on depending on the channel you watch.
Right.
Perspectives are completely 180 degrees in the opposite direction, So how do you get the truth,
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but here's the thing about Trudeau. I mean, I think it's to the point now, because the big thing is like the mandates, mask mandates, so they don't want to have to wear masks and like that. And I know there's going to push buttons, but really, if you just look at the science and not the science, not the political science, but the medical science, okay? There's so much out there now that says masks do not work. In fact, they're doing more harm than they are good. And even the masks that people are wearing, even they don't prevent you from getting it, and they don't prevent you from spreading it if you have it. It's just a complete dud. And I think part of it, this really gets into, actually the main theme of this podcast, which is the psychology of division. I think people make a stand, and then there's almost like an ego component to it, where they don't want to admit they were wrong. It's so darn hard for people to admit that they were wrong, but it even goes beyond admitting that they're wrong. It's like, I've talked about this in my lectures before, Scotty. I don't know about, wouldn't it be a different world if everybody just agreed with you and did whatever you said?
Yeah.
Well, I think part of the psychology of tyranny is they start to really believe that and get in that position, and it feeds that facet of everybody's psychology, but it overtakes them. And so now it's to the point, I think, where Trudeau is like, he didn't even want to consider all the new information coming out about masks and whether or not they work, and if the mandates are more helpful or more destructive. He's just mad because they are not listening to him. And he's not backing down. I think it has a lot more to do with that sort of ego. People should listen to him, What?
Part of the, we talked about in classes before. I don't know if we've ever mentioned it on this, but about the divine currents, we call, called it, where there is that one, channel.
It's a really excellent point, Scotty. To say it briefly, the 5 divine currents there, and this comes right out of Vedic tradition. They're like basically 5 different constructs around which the human psyche functions, and one of them is kind of like the "I'm right, you're wrong" mentality, the control. It's rooted in betrayal, feeling betrayed, and then in turn betraying. And and they want to control. They want to run things. If everybody, they're kind of their war cry is, everybody just listen to me, the world will be fine. And that's a lot of times what political leaders, especially tyrants, that's how they function. And I think that's what's going on with Trudeau, Scotty. I mean, he's not interested in talking to him. He just wants them to submit, It's almost like a psychological thing.
What's interesting too is that they're finding more and more, not only that about the mask, but even the vaccine. They're showing statistically it's lowering the severity of the virus to a person, but it's not stopping them from being able to get it, and it's not stopping them from being able to spread it.
I think that history is going to look back at the way this virus thing was handled as just downright barbaric. Right up there with putting leeches on people to bleed them if they're sick, to pull out the evil spirits. It's
Theodoric of York. I don't know if you remember that Saturday Night Live guy.
No,
it was Steve Martin. He was the medieval barber. It was funny.
That would be funny, yeah. But at any rate, like you said, the vaccines. I think the vaccines have done more damage than good, and that hasn't even surfaced yet. The long-term effects.
Yeah.
And more that is coming out, but it's being buried. The information is being hidden, and ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, the whole thing about when people are sick, they should be cloistered. I mean, all it does is spread the disease. All this stuff. And that's John Hopkins, saying that they're doing more damage than they are good. If they just let the thing go and made, the therapies that they had, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, the whole thing is just so sick. Anyway, that's all going to come out. Now, here's another interesting thing. This whole thing about the Ukraine, that's a very interesting subject. And I don't know that we'll ever get the true scoop on that. It'd be interesting if you could see demographic polls in Ukraine about how many of the people wouldn't mind if Russia invaded, how many would want them not to invade, what their perspectives are. We'll never find that out.
Well, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Mike, but one of the ladies that works with us,
Hmm.
she's Russian heritage, has family over in Russia and all that, has been talking about some things that, and it leads back to what Biden had said about, where he kind of had I don't know if it was a gaffe or if it was a slip where he said, well, it depends on the severity of what happens, what our response is going to be. In other words, how far Putin comes in. But what she said, and I don't know whether this is true or it's not or whatever,
Yeah, we don't know what's true and what's not anyway. So go ahead.
but there's a portion of Ukraine that was it's Russian speaking.
Oh, absolutely. The whole eastern part of Ukraine is mostly Russian.
Yeah, so supposedly there are some nasty things happening where the Ukrainians are not being very nice to these people that
Well,
are Russian.
there's definitely conflict there. Just kind
Yeah,
of what I was saying indirectly. There's pro-Russian, there's
yeah,
anti-Russian. And how all those chips fall and what's really going on, we don't know. But there's
yeah.
an interesting thing I saw just on the news this morning. There was a retired Russian general, but he's still very influential, and he wrote an article bashing Putin, and he said that if they invade, it's going to hurt so many Russians, and it's going to so compromise Russia's position in the international community uh, that it's going to do Russia far more damage than good. And he also said, pretty bold of this guy, he said that one of the reasons Putin is doing this, he said the reason, I imagine there are other reasons, but one of the reasons Putin is doing this is because there are domestic conflicts now that, there's tensions in Russia, there's going on, and Putin just wanted to deflect all that, and he's kind of using Ukraine, and everybody's attention goes on Ukraine and forgets about the domestic conflict. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'll tell you a really big component of this that they're not talking about too much is the more we oppose and have negativity with Russia, the more that's driving Russia to bond with China. And that's not doing us any good. Now, there's a finesse there, of course, but I think more than, well, what would you do if Russia invaded Ukraine? I think it has more to do with what should we be saying? What should our leaders be saying right now to Putin to best manage this thing? It's the art of negotiation. It's a subtle art, and I'm not seeing it happen. It's just saber rattling on both sides, That's kind of relates to what I was saying, the psychology of division. Where are the adults? I mean, I really think if somebody could just sit down with Putin and talk to him, just really talk to him, that's the main thing we need right now. And I'm not seeing where that's happening. People are talking to him, but not in a artful way, not in a really intelligent way, more saber rattling, or if you do this, I'm going to do that, childish, really. Anyway, let's move on because we got so many things here. Oh, did you hear about this, Scotty? I just heard it in the news this morning for the first time. That John Durham is the investigative attorney. I think he's in Rhode Island or somewhere, and he's investigating the whole Russia collusion thing with Trump. Evidently, yeah, and they finally now he's come out with irrefutable evidence that the Clinton campaign funded the what's the word infiltration of the Trump servers at Trump Tower, and also after he was president at the White House.
I thought that they found that out a long time ago, didn't they?
They were suspecting it and they were investigating it, and there was a lot of smoking guns, but now it's done. That's what was going on, and so now a question comes up: what about the statute of limitations? It's been so long. Will they ever go after him or what?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I don't know if you remember this, Scotty, but way back in Trump Tower when Trump was running for president, he was saying that he's being spied upon, and the press laughed at him, said, "Oh, that's ridiculous."
Yeah.
Turned out it's true.
Yeah.
So that's going on. It'll be interesting to see where that shakes out. Next topic, uh, registering guns. Do you really think that a convict with a gun that they didn't legally purchase, if we register guns or ask for guns to come, back to the government or whatever, do you
Yeah.
think they're going to cooperate with that? No. All you're going to do is disarm law-abiding citizens. And there's a strong argument. First of all, Second Amendment, but there's a strong argument for why people should have guns to protect their home. Also, the original intent of the Constitution that it's good to have a militia, and I've talked about that before. How there were a lot of countries in Eastern Europe, they attribute the fact that they weren't overtaken by communism by the fact that all the people were armed. So anyway, I'm opposed to registering guns for that reason, because then all you're going to do is register and take away guns from the law-abiding people. I'll
I
tell
thought
you.
guns had to be registered already, didn't they?
Yeah, well, but they want to make databases, and then I think they also they're talking about different things, charging people so much money for a license to keep their gun,
Oh,
or offering to buy them back, take your choice, that kind of a thing.
right.
Yeah, shouldn't do it. I mean, I get the intent,
Right.
but I just don't think it would work. Okay, we're going to talk about masks a little bit. And we kind of already touched on this, but there's so many highly credentialed experts in the field of immunology, virology, and they're all saying the masks don't work. There was that one panel I talked about. What's his name? Ben Johnson, I guess, the senator.
Right.
That's his name, from Wisconsin, I think. He had a panel there. There were 12 people sitting around. They were all highly qualified. John Hopkins, Harvard, Stanford, tremendously credentialed. And I guess in the whole room, there were like dozens of these highly credentialed people, all saying the same thing. One guy even pulled out a mask. He said, this is the only kind of mask that would work. It weighed about 10 pounds, it looked like. It had these two big round things on either side, and you put this mask on, looks like a gas mask. And he said, this is the only mask that would work, but it would only protect the user. If the user had the virus, they would still spread it to the room. And they said the only way they could prevent that, the only problem with that was they would kill the user because they wouldn't be able to breathe. So, I mean, the whole thing is such a farce, and it's going to, in history is going to remember the way the COVID virus was handled as just barbaric. I assure you of that. All right. So what I really wanted to get into today is the main body, and we kind of covered it indirectly in a lot of ways, but the psychology of division and global purification. It's like even the world leaders, they behave like children, and there's no real, I mean, where's the adult in the room? Where's somebody who can, for example, sit down with Putin and reason with him, or any of the issues? Trudeau. I mean, Trudeau's not even willing to talk. I mean, how old is this guy emotionally, So it goes right down to the roots of tyranny. What is tyranny really rooted in? And it's rooted really in that sort of psychological, Scotty, like you were saying, that one facet of human psychology, which is sort of I'm right, you're wrong, everybody should listen to me, just cooperate, I'm in control here. And if anybody doesn't cooperate, they feel betrayed, and that makes them angry, and they attack. And that's the roots of tyranny. It's a psychological defect almost, the other thing is what's going on in the world today. And this goes right back to the ancient seers and what they were saying. And I think what happens though, we talk about how this is a phase transition. We've talked about that, and we're going from the age of oblivion to a more enlightened, more mature, more golden age. But what's the mechanics of that? How does that work? All right, so people are getting more insightful. There's shifts and things happening. And I think even the internet went a long way, first of all, to making everybody crazy because they were getting all these contradictory inputs, and some would align with this, others would align with that. And so I think there's a learning period there of how do you manage so many diverse inputs in your brain and in your world. I think people are getting crazy with it, and they cling on to one or the other, and it's just nutty. But over and above that, there's a purification process going on with this transition from the age of oblivion to a golden age. And so we do well to take a look at what happens when an individual psychology, a global psychology, what happens when it purifies. And I think anybody who's done any real intense purification, like extensive meditation programs, things like that, what happens when we purify all the imbalances, all the distortions, all of the limited thinking, the narrow vision, that can all be categorized in one word, and it's stress. It's stress in the physiology. And boy, I could talk about the DNA here too. Maybe we'll get into it. But the physiology is stressed. The psychology is stressed. People function then almost more from the stress and what it dictates than anything. And when you purify, what happens is that stress, instead of becoming latent and kind of just not showing, you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg, it all starts to get released. And as it releases, it overtakes people. And I don't know if you've ever done long rounding, long meditation courses, stuff, you can tell when somebody is unstressing. They get really angry and negative and nothing is right, and they argumentative. It just gets ridiculous. Well, that's what's happening with the whole world right now. The whole world is purifying. So we can look at that and say, oh, the world is nuts. Well, yeah, but at the same time, it's purifying. So that's the good news. And we're going to get through this transition, and people are going to wake up. It's kind of like the whole world. It's like a big washing machine of humanity that's going on right now. And it can just be so nuts. But that's the mechanics of purification. Okay. Anything else on that, Scotty?
No, yeah, I think it's just important to know that when you're purifying, you don't know how it's gonna come out.
Excellent point. And you don't think you're purifying; you think you're right. That's an extremely important point. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. The whole world is purifying, and all that does is it gets them more firmly vested in their perspective, whatever it is. So there's no humility, there's no real reflection. It's just judgment and polarization, One last, just a couple of last things here. I saw a quote by some ancient Greek. I can't think of his name right now, but he said, in war, truth is the first casualty. That applies, I think, not just to global, to ordinary interpretation of the word war, but that's conflicts in general. Truth is the first thing to go. And so using Ukraine as an example, it's tough to really know what's going on there, Truth is the first casualty of conflict, you see. All right. Go ahead.
It's also the lack of trust of the sources of information. You don't know what's the agenda. It sucks because,
where do you go for truth? It's a casualty of war. It's a casualty of conflict. You listen to one station on TV or on the internet, and they say one thing. You listen to another, they say completely the opposite. I try to do that. I try to hear things from, and if nothing else, it's like, whoa, it's kind of amazing to witness, Uh, so keep in mind, this is the process of purification we've got going on right now, and it is unprecedented. This hasn't happened like this before. Everywhere you turn, it's
Yeah.
just nuts. One last thing, about the Constitutional Convention, Scotty, Article 5 of the Constitution says
No.
that if this is huge. It says if 2/3 of the states vote to do this, then they can have a constitutional convention where they meet, and I think then it takes 3/4 of a vote, 3/4 of the people to vote, I think, to pass a change in the Constitution.
Oh.
And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because a lot of people are saying that, like, the election thing is one. They want to make the elections, structure them in a way where there can't be any cheating, so there's no longer a debate about whether or not anybody cheated. And they could do a constitutional convention. They could do an amendment to require that. Balancing the budget, that's another one they want. But now some people argue that if you do a constitutional convention and you get in there, you could do anything you want. You could really mess up the Constitution.
Yeah, that's the one that you wonder. Do
Yeah.
you want to open that up?
But I think that's why the founding fathers said it has to be 3/4 of the states to vote any change in the Constitution.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty high bar. What's that, Scott?
This brings up we got a comment about where do we go for truth, and we've talked about in the past where I know I bring up a lot is it's like we got to rely on ourselves, and that's one of the comments that we got is yourself, and it's continually working on your ability to discern, and
very well put, Scotty. That's absolutely right. And the thing is, there's a tendency. It's too is a delicate balance, because there's a tendency when you hear something to believe it. People tend to believe what they heard first, especially once they get indoctrinated into it. And so we can. Here's an example. There's this thing I saw on, I think it was the History Channel, and they were talking about these two prospectors back in the 1850 gold rush, in California, and they were sitting by a creek, and they were really depressed because they weren't finding any gold, and they were down to their last dollar or whatever, and just suffering and really despondent. So one of them got up and said, "I'm just going to go for a walk." And he went for a walk. And then the guy who was still at the camp heard a gunshot. So he went running. The guy killed himself. And so the way the story goes, he dug a grave right by where the body was, to bury the guy. And when he did, he found a big, huge gold nugget. It was hugely wealthy.
Right there at the
yeah, right there where he dug it. Okay, so what do you think about that? Well, doesn't it make you wonder if maybe they found the gold and he wanted it all for himself, and so he killed the guy?
Oh.
I mean, couldn't it be? I mean, and I'm not saying he did. What I'm saying is that, and that might be a bad example. I don't know. I don't think it's a bad example, but your discernment has to go to that point where you hear something and it's like, does this really make sense to me? Or what's more likely? Is it more likely that they finally found some gold and he killed the guy? I mean, they were desperate. Or is it more likely that when he was burying the guy, he happened to hit a big gold nugget right where he was digging the grave?
Right.
And you don't even make a decision, but the only true knowing, like Socrates said, is knowing that you know nothing. And how do you hold that? You don't sit there and say, "Oh, you killed the guy." No. But we don't really know, and we navigate the waters of life through the medium of not knowing. But we're just not gullible, and we reflect and we ponder. This whole Ukraine thing, I don't know for sure the consequences, but you hear all the different perspectives, you hear all the different angles, and you reflect on them and you ponder, and then you make your best choice and move forward. And then if things aren't working out the way, instead of hanging on to your perspective like Trudeau is doing, you adjust accordingly. based on what comes back. You put something out, see what comes back, adjust accordingly.
Yeah. Don't be
Yeah.
white knuckled on to any one perspective.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Ignorance.
Yeah.
Ignorant. Right?
So it goes deeply into the whole definition of truth, really. I think there's a Dylan song, there is no truth outside the gates of Eden. Yeah.
Yeah. There,
Yeah.
Michael, there was another comment.
In War and Peace, wait a minute. In War and Peace, the truth just twists. That's the first line, I think, of that song called Gates of Eden. I'm sorry, Scotty. I didn't mean.
No.
Go ahead.
No, I was having a conversation the other day, and it has to do with a comment that was given to us here about, I was talking to somebody up in Seattle, and the subject came up about how terrible Trump was, and then the subject came up of, of course, well, how do you think Biden's doing, and what do you think kind of job he's doing, right? And I kept saying to the guy, I was like, well, out of 300 and some odd million people, I mean, are these the best two options that we have for people to navigate this whole thing, do you think? I mean, would you, in a Biden's case, would you hire him to run your company if, that was who it was? But somebody was asking, do you think there'll be somebody coming along to help guide us, or either like Jesus coming back to open up everything, or whatever, an avatar, is somebody coming back, is somebody being born, that kind of thing. They had asked that.
Well, I kind of addressed this. I'm not sure if I addressed this in a podcast or not, but there is a second coming of Christ and it's on its way. We're in the transition of that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in one individual. It could be within all individuals. They say in the age we're living in now, the ancient seers say that the Rakshasas, like the demons or the negativity, demons is kind of a nasty word, but dwell inside the people. But in the age we're going into, they dwell afar. They're not within the hearts and minds of the people. And so Christ, in that regard, then dwells within all of us. The kingdom of heaven is within. And the golden age will be more about, as opposed to one person, it's going to be more about we're all living that Christ spirit more fully that dwells deep within all of us. That's my perspective on it.
It's like the Christ consciousness is going to be.
Yeah. Scotty, right. You're doing a good thing here. I appreciate it. And that is when people send comments, I'm juggling so much on my computer and my notes and stuff that if you do see comments coming in and you bring them up like you're doing, that's great. Yeah. And that way we can encourage people to do more comments. I haven't been doing it because I can't do all these different things at the same time. But if you could take that over,
I got it. Yeah. I got it.
Field comments would be great. All right, great. I guess that's about it, huh? Anything else, Scott?
Well, another question was, what do you think is the best or most reliable method and way to evaluate between what's true and what's not true?
Yeah, it's again, I think that has more to do with you than it does about what the different perspectives are. Because if you're white knuckled on a perspective, or if you're out of balance, then you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
But if you're settled within your own self, and that's not something you can't just say, well, I'm going to breathe 10 times deep and then I'll be settled within myself. That might help. But we're talking about evolution, human evolution. And human evolution it's a gradual process. Evolution is a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's a process that we have to cultivate. But nevertheless, the tools that we've even referred to in this podcast are a huge step forward. But it's work. And one thing I've noticed is that people hear things like that and, oh yeah, that's great. Okay, now I get it. And they try to do it, but then they forget about it, because what do? They revert back onto the state of their psychology and their physiology. And that to them is truth. And it's not. That's their stuff.
Yeah.
Those they're issues.
I like when you've said in the past about like we're a sum total of all of our experiences, and due to those experiences and things, I guess to a lot of degree that uh, dictates what sticks to us. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
and
that was
from the
Maharishi
perspective where-
Patanjali. That's right. Maharishi Patanjali, thousands of years ago, talked about the chit, the storehouse of impressions, and how that creates mind. And so when he talks about the state of no mind, he's not talking about, oh, I don't have a mind. He's talking about that that all those impressions that have colored our perspectives on things have been wiped clean. The distortions, in other words, the impositions. And so we function in a state of freedom from mind. And by virtue of that, we come from the divinity with our own being, as opposed to the programming that creates the mind. The mind is created in part by programming.
Well, also I like when you talked about in the past how thoughts are tools; they're not masters. These are the things that you go and you put things out there. You use those thoughts, you use those things that pop up, emotions, whatever, to kind of probe and
Yeah,
get out
that's
there
good,
and
Scott. How
stir
did I
it up.
put it? I used to put it, thoughts are great tools, but lousy masters.
Lousy masters, right?
And so
Yeah.
you can hear these thoughts, you can hear that thoughts, and instead of bowing down to this thought and having it be the master, it's a tool. And there's another tool over there. And then from your own inner being, you evaluate, make your best guess. I could even call it a guess, and then put something out and see what happens, and be flexible to navigate those waters
Yeah.
of not knowing.
And then that I think that awareness of too is that the universe is so sticky, and you talked about the Brer Rabbit thing, the tar baby of the universe, where it just wants to snap you back, almost to what you've been conditioned over time because of all those experiences that have happened to you.
Yeah, the tar baby, it was kind of like if you have a perspective and there's something over there that you're opposed to and you punch it, you just get stuck to it even more. And the more you fight, the more tar you get all over you, and the more wrapped up you get in with the tar baby.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will express that to people: just stay out of the weeds. Do your best to stay out of the weeds. See, the tar baby existed in a briar patch in the story of Brer Rabbit. Yeah, it's just do your best to stay out of the weeds. And that way, and especially if you're passionate, if you're emotional, especially if you're feeling emotionally imbalanced, that is no time to engage. Wait until you calm down, and then you're in a state where you can wisely and reflectively bring up whatever issue it is. And I'll tell you, more often than not, what I've seen is once people do get back into balance and stuff, they look back at what they were so inflamed over, and they don't even care anymore. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Wars are fought over what people get inflamed over. Literally, wars are fought for what people get inflamed over. It's just a pathetic thing, but it's changing. The world is purifying, and that's the good news. That's the great news. The transition is happening, and for that we can say hallelujah, All right. Anything else, Scotty?
No, I think that's good.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.